3, 2, 1.
Welcome to a very new special series with the astrologer from the Netherlands, Martien Hermes. Welcome again, Martien.
Hi, Volker. How are you?
Yes, very well. Well, we I did have a little problem technically today with my email account. But anyways, now we are set to go. It will be about the famous personality of Professor Dr. Carl Gustav Jung. And we will do something very special, which I believe has never been done on the internet yet. It is a series of talks with traditional astrology methods to start the effort of approaching this person and his life and his biography and his influence and his clairvoyance and whatever we have with Carl Gustav Jung by trying to find these things in his chart. And not using the psychological approach of modern times, but using Vettius Valens and older people writing about traditional astrology. Right, Martin?
Yes, that's true.
So we start with a little bit information. We prepared something. Okay, we have a homepage, especially for this series. It's called Jung Talks with the traditional astrologer Martien Hermes. And the first you can find are some information. Well, the literature about Jung is endless. So I had to select those I find interesting. We start with the biography of Barbara Hanna, who was a close friend of Jung. Might be one of the best biographies you can find on the market. Then we have the special biography by Nan Savage Healy, however you pronounce that. It's about the woman which is mostly not mentioned by the Jungian analysts because they don't like this part of Jung's life. This biography is very interesting to read. It's Tony Wolff from, I believe, 1910 till 1930 was somewhat his second wife. But we might get into that later when we come to the animas of C.G. Jung. Then we have this interesting special approach of Peter Kingsley, Catafalque, which is a double volume set. The second book is only the index. It's a complete book about cross-references and indexes and glossars. And he is sort of he sees Jung as a prophet like Jesus Christ. Well, that's a little bit short in interpretation, but that's his approach. Jung is a very important person for the civilization of the world in his view. Then we have Soni Shamdashani. That's the book about the history and the making of analytic psychology of C.G. Jung's. It's a book if people are interested in the nitty-gritty of the Jungian psychology approach, this is the book to go to. And then, of course, there's an abundance literature about the Red Book. Since 2009, the Red Book was published. This is the German edition with all the pictures. This is the English edition with all the pictures. And that is the text, simply the text without the pictures. And that is the same thing in English. So if the viewers of this webinar or this talk want to dive into that, and they can of course dive into the 4-volume up till now about the Red Book. We can have a look at this one, the first volume, and go into it a little bit to see who is writing about this stuff. Now here we get rid of that. Okay, we have Liz Green. It's edited by Maury Stein and Thomas Arts. They are very well known about the Red Book. And then we have Liz Green, The Way of What Is to Come, Jung's Vision of the Aquarian Age. Then we have Stephen Holler, Agnostic, about Abraxas, Jung's Gnostic Demiurge in Liber Novus. Then we have C.G. Jung and the Prophet Puzzle by Lance Owens, who is an expert on C.G. Jung's Gnostic approach, and so on. So these 4 volumes are worthwhile reading if you want to dig into the Red Book. And then just to give you an impression, if you put up only in Amazon DE the words Jung's Red Book, you get 8,000 results. So basically we are talking about a literature nobody really can read. Okay, so far the literature. Then we have the link to our YouTube channel, where all the videos with Martien Hermes on the zodiacal releasing aphasis you can find. The 8th webinar was a couple of days ago. And then we have Martien Hermes in traditional astrology, the special site about this 4-parter about the zodiacal releasing, and there's a lot of information here. You can find the YouTube channel of Martien here, and you can find Martien's homepage here. So basically, we don't have this information on the Jung side. Okay, and now we have, we approach the chart of C.G. Jung, and we have on Martien Hermes sites, we have a subsite where you can find Jung's chart with Placidus. Looks like in the AstroSeek program, looks like this. And then we have Jung's chart with whole sign houses and including the outer planets. And then I go back to our Jung side, and there we have the first, probably the first slide. Is it the first slide with the graph? This one, is that the first slide, Martien?
Yes,
okay.
It is.
This will be the first slide of the presentation of Martien. Today, this will be more or less a presentation by Martien. I take off the desktop. This will be sort of a presentation approach. And later on, we envision about 5 talks of this kind. Later on, we might dig into more back and forth talking. Basically, the idea is to approach a person of history, let's say, or like C.G. Jung, with the methods of traditional astrology, like peeping into the craftsman workshop of Martien Hermes. And now I give Martien the host function.
Thank you.
Host erstellen. Okay. Well, yes, I want Martien to be the host. You should be a host by now.
I am. Thank you.
Okay.
So here we are.
So it's all yours. And
Thank
I
you.
will insert a few questions today, and the amount of questions by my part will become larger during the development of the series. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Volker. Well, welcome back, everybody. I hope you will enjoy this talk about the chart of C.G. Jung. The original idea was to simply talk about his chart, putting up his chart, and then start talking about it. But before I do that, I need to address some important issues with this delineation to get the viewer and the listener acquainted with some of the new material that has surfaced in the study of Hellenistic astrology, which I tend to practice in my practice as an astrologer. So this is going to be a pretty extensive talk about some of the important topics. Some of them were covered already in other talks that I did and other webinars that I presented, but I will refer you to these, and I will show you how I go about delineating something about Jung's personality, because I will be focusing on the first house of his chart. Now, before I do that, let me say something about my work with Jung's astrology. So I started studying astrology pretty early in '83, and at that time you couldn't get rid of any Jungian influence in the methods and the books that were presented on astrology, simply because he was the main character of psychological astrology. So as a well-thinking person, I thought, well, I need to get acquainted with what psychology actually is. So what I did, I started studying a modern textbook on psychology, and I was rather disappointed simply because it was very dry and very scientific.
Do you remember which book was disappointing you?
It was a Dutch book, and it was simply a teaching manual for people starting to study psychology. So
You should never do that to understand Jung's psychology.
no, no, no,
Never read a Jungian psychologist book about Jungian psychology. That's not
no, no, no,
that's not the way to do it. But those
no.
people are around, and many people think they are Jungian psychologists. And if you look deeper and start to ask them questions what they know about Jung, they basically stop knowing things about Jung in 1915, and after that, all the
Right.
books after that they don't like anymore.
Exactly. He sort of became the shadow figure of
Yes, yeah.
psychology
You
and
you can you can you can you
psychoanalysis.
can you can get you can have some fun with Jungian psychologists if you ask them about the Ion book, because that's the book they hate, because that's the book about astrology.
Exactly, exactly. So
Anyways, okay.
yeah, so because I was young and naive, I thought, well, I need to know something about psychology. And then it soon turned out that psychology had little to do with psychoanalysis, which was the fascinating material on the dark depths of the human mind, which I had encountered already in psychological astrology. So then it dawned upon me that what we call now psychological astrology very often is psychoanalytical astrology, simply because people want to know about that. So, but I was quite taken with Jung, of course, as many people are, because he's a fascinating psychologist and also a sort of a philosopher. And the interesting thing is that I later found out that much of his work also had much to do with the view of Plato on the world and how it functions, etc. And that's interesting because Robert Schmidt, the man who introduced us to the depth of Hellenistic astrology, was very deep into Platonic philosophy. So that's very interesting. So I always jokingly say that Christianity and Christendom is sort of Platonism for the masses, and Jung is Platonism for astrologers. But perhaps I,
That's interesting. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
But to insert a little comment on that, one has to realize that the Gnostic aspect of Jung's work is hotly debated.
yes, it is.
And you get into deep waters if you want to find out, is there a Jungian philosophy at all?
Hmm.
Is he agnostic? Is he a Platonist? Is he a
Right,
Neoplatonist? Is he an alchemist? Because if you look at his work since 1930, he basically stopped doing anything else than alchemy.
right.
And there is the intriguing factor. Will we find these facets of his life in the traditional astrology delineation
Yeah,
approach we are doing
yeah,
here? Okay.
yeah. Okay. So I read everything there was to read about Jung, and there was much
No,
published
no, no,
about
no,
him.
no, 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 no. No way. You
What?
haven't read anything there was to be read about Jung. That would mean 8,000 and more books. No way. What books did you read?
I can't. Yeah,
Okay, I
some of
see
them you
you
see
write The
here.
Psychology of Man. That is a good book. You read Jacobi. That is a good one. Okay, you got a good impression. Okay, I agree on that. But
I did.
you scratched the surface. Okay.
I did. Yes, but I also taught classes on Jung's
uh,
psychology
yeah.
in the context of astrology, of
When
course.
did you do that? When was that?
Oh, that the course I did was in I believe 1993,
Okay, that
and
was long before the publication of the Red Book. Uh,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
the viewers have to realize any book written before 2009 could not implement what Jung had done in his Red Book and his Black Books.
Hmm.
And basically that means since 2009, the landscape has shifted dramatically
Hmm.
because of the publication by Sonu Samdasani, who had a long relationship with the Jung family, who didn't want to publish this Red Book
Okay.
to the start of. So when Martin is talking about a course of Jung's psychology, he was talking about a Jung which is now no longer available, because after the publication of the Red Book, you have to change everything in looking at Jung. Okay.
Okay. Okay. I'm quite interested in that because I'm not that familiar with the change which happened. So, I'm learning as I go along as well. So
Okay.
that's great. So after that, also critical.
Yeah, you should not put up this ridiculous null approach. This is propaganda against Jung. Never talk about that
It
again.
is. Well, it's interesting because well, I had a talk with Robert Zoller about this, and he said, well, the reason Richard Knoll wrote this because he was denied access to the New York chapter, I believe, of the Jungian psychoanalysis,
Okay.
psychoanalytical, etc. This is a book that I highly recommend.
Much better. Yes, we are approaching
Yeah.
the good stuff. Okay.
Because the interesting thing is that Maggie Hyde is quite critical of modern psychological astrologers at the time that she wrote this. And she was really trying to say that it's much better to have a method. And she, I believe she embraced the traditional approach to astrology, which is more rigorous and not so highly dependent on free association, etc., which is often like sort of channeling sort of a
Yeah.
delineation of a chart, which is of course interesting in the Jungian first period of his, let's say, his presentations, because people go off on a sort of a fantasy trip trying to associate everything with everything, and that's not good astrology. So,
And
and
it's not,
Maggie,
and it is not the astrology Jung himself practiced, because we know that early on, since his relationship with Freud, 1907, Jung was practicing astrology to understand his clients better, and he
right,
was doing an astrology which has no resemblance to the psychological astrology of the modern Jungian astrologer. So you're quite right.
exactly.
Jung would agree with the approach of this
Yeah.
book of Maggie Hyde. Okay.
Yeah. And Maggie also wrote a very interesting and very funny introduction, which is also a very good one. Uh, the introducing Jung, which I have here live
Yeah.
because
Okay.
I studied it, and it's a very good short introduction into the life of Jung and his ideas and his theory.
And my
So
Kate Romkensio, she didn't know about the Red Book. Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so now let's have a look at the prenatal analysis, which is something you need to do before you can say anything about a chart. And so I will do this for Jung's personality because that's always the first thing that people start with, as do I. So that's about his ascendant and the domicile ruler of the ascendant.
When you are talking about prenatal, you don't mean a prenatal chart.
No, I'm
Oh, okay.
simply talking before I say anything about what
Okay.
I'm seeing.
Okay.
So this is the term that
Yeah.
Schmidt
Okay.
used, the prenatal analysis, PNA.
Yeah. Okay.
So
Okay.
that's it.
So
Okay.
basically, it's an introduction analysis.
Right, that's it.
Yeah.
Before you say anything, you need to evaluate anything in the chart, and you must
The
try.
sort of the largest of the large picture.
Right, you need to
Okay. Okay.
understand
Yeah.
whenever you see a planet, you need to establish what it's about and how strong it is and how
Yeah. Okay.
forceful, etc.
Okay.
So that's what I'm going to show now, and then I'm going to go into something really important, which is the Hellenistic idea about aspects and configurations,
Okay.
which is quite a new approach to what you can see with all this material. So that's the reason why I did it in, again, a presentation by means of slides. So, okay, now I use this chart. I had a communication with Karen Hamaker-Zondag, which is the most famous Dutch astrologer who is very deep into Jung's material. And she said that his daughter, who was also an astrologer, said that Jung always used this chart for his own life. So let's do that as well.
So for the viewers, that's a hot debated issue, because
Mhm.
Liz Green, in her recent monography about Jung's astrology, was presenting a slightly different chart. It's not very much
Mhm.
different. It's still the ascendant is still in Aquarius, but it's
Yeah.
a couple of degrees different. So on the homepage I showed you before, there is the Liz Green reference. So there will be
Mhm.
no solution to this problem.
Okay. Okay.
Did you think about birth time correction?
No, I didn't. No,
Would
I'm
you
not.
be able to do that
No,
for
I'm not
this
that.
small difference?
No, I'm not that deep into rectifying charts. So no,
Rectifying charts is not your cup of tea. Okay,
no,
there you
it's not.
go. For the viewers in the internet, in the worldwide net, please, if anybody is there who is able to do a birth time correction approach in a case like this, where the difference in the ascendant is only a couple of degrees, please let us know.
Mhm.
Okay.
That's great. Thank you. Well, so let's first, the first thing to do is that you need to establish the impact that a planet can have. So which planet dominate this life, because we're simply talking about somebody's life, by means of strength. And strength is always related to the pivots, which is the first place, 10th, 7th, and 4th. But it can also be with the
When you say
MCLIC.
pivots, you mean the planet is positioned in the first part of the first house, or is it only he is in the first 10th, 7th, or 4th house at all?
Yes, in the image, yeah.
So
Because
it's not important that it's on the first degrees of the
no, no.
okay.
Simply this Saturn is in the first place, so even though it's very far away from the actual degree of the rising image.
So
So
if the planet is on the 23rd degrees, that's as valid as if it is on the third degree.
yeah, that's it.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that's the main difference in modern schools nowadays. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Now, when we talk about strength, I addressed this issue in other talks that I did. These places are always called angular, but my question always is, where do you find an angle in a round chart? So these are the pivotal images. So this is the place where the zodiac, the ecliptica, changes direction with reference to how uh, this picture moves. So in the ascendant and descendant, you see that the zodiac rises from the depth of night. And on the other side, the seventh, it dives into the night, from day into night. And in the 10th and the 4th place, which is not the MC and the IC, the 10th and the 4th place is where the uprising in the 10th place, the upward movement of the zodiac turns into a downward movement, which is the opposite of what happens in the 4th place. So these places are centers, and that's very
Yes.
important. They are central. So the planets that are in these images are very central to this life.
Yes,
That's
I
simply it.
believe the term angular has something to do with the calculation of the houses. As long as you have a whole sign system tradition, you have no angulars, as you said. But as soon
Mhm.
as you have a house system where the MC is the beginning of the 10th house, then you have sort of an angular situation, a mathematical angular situation. Do you know, in your studies in the old traditional books, did the term angular surface before the new house systems?
That's a good
I
question. I
don't
don't
think
know.
so.
No.
I think as far as my research goes, the term angular has to do with the house system. And if you don't have a modern house system, you can't have the term angular. And then the problem
Well,
disappears.
it has to do also with the translation of the word cardinal. And
Yes. Okay.
these images are called cardinal simply because they mark a turning point, which
Yeah.
has to
Okay.
do with sort of the word for a cardo is uh, I don't know the English word for it. It's a pivot,
Yeah.
something
Okay.
pivots.
Okay. Yeah.
So
Okay.
that's where this comes from. So let's have
Okay.
a look. Well, Mr. Jung had three planets which were very strong in the sense that they were angular placed in, sorry, in places that were pivotal. So these things played a pivotal role in his life simply because
You
they,
do realize that these three planets are the most important planets in the Huber school.
no, I don't.
Okay,
I'm
but
just
that's the
familiar
case,
with,
yeah. Okay,
okay.
in the Huber school, Sun, Moon, and Saturn are the main important planets in their school system. So basically, this is interesting that Jung has this strong
Yep.
positioning in
Yep.
traditional astrology. Okay.
It does indeed. Yeah.
It
So
it would be interesting to have a Zoom conference discussion with Huber School people and the two of us about this positioning of the three planets, how they
yeah,
what they would come up with in their tradition to delineate Jung and in comparison to Martin Hermes. That would be
okay.
interesting.
Oh, it would, yeah. Okay, now the second thing we need to do is to establish their quality because planets can be strong, but it will not be the case that it is actually very positive for a person. We saw this in the zodiacal releasing videos that I did with Holly, who kindly permitted me to use her chart, and there you could see a Mars not of belonging to the sect, which was quite a difficult thing to have in her life. So that caused many problems in her life. So you can have a planet angular, but it will not be the case that then it's always a very good one for you. So it might interfere with things in your life. So you need to establish the quality, and the quality uh, is always decided by means of are these planets in their own domicile or not, or in their exaltation, which is in this case indeed also the case with these three planets. Saturn is in its own domicile of the water pourer, Aquarius. The sun is in its own domicile of the lion, and the moon is in its exaltation image of the bull. So that's also pretty good. So these are the stars of his charts, so to say, so to speak. And that's uh, very important because they are pivotal, they are strong, and they are also quite capable simply because they are in their own images.
And you could say
So,
all the other planets are not, right?
well, that need to be evaluated with reference to these planets. So you
Okay.
can say that the other planets are not as strong or not as
Okay.
good as these,
Yeah.
because these are very powerful and they are very good quality. So,
Okay.
but there's more to say.
So to make it clear, in another chart, you could have a personality where where Mercury and Venus and Jupiter are in the position you are describing here for Saturn, Moon, and Sun,
mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
true. Yeah. Now, the important thing is for modern astrologers is to understand that this will not be descriptive of Jung's personality, simply because these planets have perhaps nothing to do with the first image. And the personality is simply one of the topics of a chart, because the chart in a traditional perspective is about the life of the native and not solely about his psyche. So that's a very important difference to make. Simply, they are representations of topics in his life, persons, situations, etc., which have a strong influence on his life, but are not descriptive of what kind of personality Mr. Jung was. So,
So
which is
if you want to find out the Jungian personality in traditional astrology, that would be only the ascendant and the correlations with the ascendant, or something else too.
yes, the aspects with the configurations with the ruler of the first place. So we're going to
But
have a look at that.
basically, it's a first house ascendant problem. If you want to dig into the personality of a client, that would be the approach, and all the rest of the chart would be something different.
Exactly. And
Okay.
it's also about the life of the native. That's
Yeah.
also quite
Yeah.
important.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
let's have a look. Okay. This is also something I did with the previous presentations. We need to understand the support. So how is this chart supporting the good things in a person's life, or even trying to this person becoming a famous figure, which of course was the case with our friend Mr. Jung. So we're going to have to look at the triplicity rulers. Here they are. I will not try to explain how we came about the triplicity rulers, but simply we need to see the sect light, which is the sun, because this sun is still somewhat above the descendant. So this sun is not under the horizon, and that's quite important, because when this chart would be different and Jung would have been a night chart, then there would be quite a difference between what I'm trying to establish here, because Mr. Jung has a very strong support by means of the triplicity ruler, simply because the sun in a fire-like image is the first triplicity ruler, and then Jupiter is the second one, and Saturn is the third one. So
By this approach, in your experience, is it important whether the sun, in this case the day chart sun, is if the sun would be, let's say, in on the top in Libra or something. Would it
Mm-hmm.
be a different delineation to the sun nearly going under? In your experience, does that matter at all, or is it, as long as it's above the horizon, that's it?
Yeah, this is a very simple thing to establish. This is the day chart or a night chart, and when it's a day chart, you get different triplicity rulers. So when the sun would be in a different image, whenever it's above the horizon, it will be a day chart. It's quite simple.
And the situation that the sun is close to going under is of no importance at all.
No,
Okay.
no, that's
Okay.
true, because it's still daylight.
It is
when
still a
the sun-
daylight, even if it's only a
Right,
few degrees from going under. Okay.
right.
Okay.
It will be, yes.
It's still it
So,
remains a day chart, no matter where the sun is located. Okay. As long
exactly.
as it's above the horizon, it's a day chart.
Exactly, that's the bottom line of this this method, and this I talked about this also. We divide the life into two periods because this is one of the universal approaches to a life in general. What can you say about the two halves of the life of this person? Well, the first one is very good. The second one is rather weak, should be, but it's Jupiter, and Jupiter in the ninth place is also very good. But it's an important thing to try to understand because you referred to a big change in the perception of Jung's work. And you could perhaps say that the first period was about the interesting facts about what was going on in his life as a psychiatrist. And then perhaps the second one, he was more into religion, etc. And the second ruler is, of course, Jupiter in the ninth place.
Do you divide the life mathematically? Number of life years and then half of it?
There's a big difficulty in trying to establish when these periods change over.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
That's, yeah, that's as well. Some people say when a planet is strong, like the sun is in Leo, you take the ascending, the time of ascension of the sun together with the minor period of the sun. Sorry, I meant the rising time of the lion together with the minor period of the sun. So that would be 19 years plus something delivered by the rising, the ascensional time of Leo in the place where he was born. But I will not go into that as yet. But there is a method, but I'm not quite sure if it always works. And the other way is to try to take the average age of a person in living in this period and then dividing it into half. But that's, of course, a bit of a strange way to do that. But it's the only way we sometimes have. So,
Okay.
so I'm not quite sure when this changed, but it could be the 19th year when he was 18 years old. That's the period of the sun, and the period of Jupiter is 12 years. Sorry, yeah, 12 years. So I'm not quite sure how that would work here. Well, the other thing having to do with the triplicity rulers is the idea of eminence. Whenever a person might be important, a notable figure, perhaps even a very famous figure, and of course this all went for Jung, who was a very important person for a long time in the psychoanalytical movement and also afterwards. So it has to do with eminence, and everybody knows the name Jung, right? So it's that. Okay, so that's the third thing. The second thing you have to do is always check out the fortune houses, which is the new houses found from the position of the lot of fortune, which is in the Scorpion in this chart. So these are the fortune houses, and the ones that are very important are the angles from fortune, especially the first one where fortune itself is, and the 10th place from fortune. And there we have the sun again. So yeah, fame and fortune might be very well connected with the position in life. What you see here is that the angular places, I will call them that for convenience, the angular places of the natal chart are also the angles of in relation to fortune. So that's extremely strong because whenever one of them is activated, is both strong because of being an angle in the natal chart, but also being an angle with reference to fortune. So that's interesting. So keep that in mind whenever you find a chart like this, where the angles coincide with the angles of fortune. That might be a very interesting uh, person to see, and you can always find ways of how this person gets on in life, and when he or she is promoted or something like that. Now, I found this in the Zodiacal Releasing from Spirit Intensive, but it might be also used for in general. So possible indications of high rank or fame of planets in fortune houses, especially the fortune MC. Now, here's a small list. And the first one, is it one of the sect lights? Is it one of the lights, which is, of course, the most important one is a sect light, which is the sun in this chart, because Jung is a day birth. So, yeah, that's interesting. So, yeah, there is much support, as it would be stated in Valence, for eminence in this chart. Okay. Okay, so this is more of a general way of approaching it. And again, these planets are very interesting simply because Saturn is in an angle from fortune, and Saturn is the ruler of the first place. We find the moon, which has a very interesting role to play in his life. And we find the sun also angular, but also angular with respect to fortune. So yeah, that's a pretty strong chart in this sense. This would not be the case if Jung had been a night birth, simply because it would have changed dramatically then, because then we would have to look at the moon, which is of course pretty good here, but also we had to look at the other night planets, which would be Mars and Venus. So that would be quite a different picture painted by these planets. So yeah, I think Jung was a day birth. Okay. Okay. Next thing to have a look at is
Do
okay.
you use this method to in the in chart correcting methods?
No, I do. Well, this of course underlines the importance of Jung, but no, I do not use it in that sense because
Okay.
it's too general. I think
Yeah.
too general.
Well,
Okay. Now,
in that specific case where the sun is close to going under, it's a confirmation that it must be a day chart, because if you
mhm,
get a time of Jung where the sun would be below the horizon, nothing would fit anymore.
right. That's
So
quite true.
basically, the discussion about the time of birth reduces itself. It must be a day chart, and then okay, let's talk about the
Hmm.
rest. Okay,
Yeah. Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Now, when we start describing Jung's life as a personality and the topics relating to the ascendant, which are life, helm. The helm is the way you steer your life. The body has to do with physical health, and breath has to do with uh, the 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 mind that is in your body, as it were. Uh, Zoller always had a very nice one-liner for the ascendant: vita corpus ingenium. Vita is the life force, vita corpus is your body, of course, and ingenium is the inborn spirit in your body. So that's quite an important topic of the first place. So let's have a look. Now, when you look at valence, that's not a very flattering description of what it means when the ascendant could be the first place and being in the water power. Those so born are malicious and haters of their own family. Um, Unchangeable, single-minded, deceitful. Well, when you read it, you think, well, is this all about Jung? That's not the way he presents himself, etc. So it's an interesting one, but we need to make some remarks about that. Something is quite typical for Jung, and I have this from this little booklet. Carl Gustav Jung was a strange, melancholic child who had no brothers, and being alone for a long time is typically something of having to do with the planet Saturn. So Saturn is a planet of isolation, social isolation, and you could say that the first 9 years of his life were tainted by this isolation somehow.
I give you an alternative. How about the sage wise man growing up in his childhood?
Yeah, but that's an interpretation that came later. We need to be aware of something that happened with Freud as well. There were a very strong believers in what everything Freud said, and then
Yes,
there
yes,
were,
okay.
uh,
But
but
let's go to another person in history, Nostradamus. If somebody is a category of itself like Nostradamus was, and he would have this chart, wouldn't it
mhm.
be a possible approach to say, okay, this prophet, this seer of the future, in his childhood, okay, he has Saturn. Now talking about Jung, he has Saturn in the first house.
Mhm.
That's the childhood of the clairvoyant prophet.
Well, this first place always has to do with everything that played a role in this person becoming a personality.
Okay.
So we need to take into account whatever was typical of the planet that rules this first place. And the typical idea of the Saturn is that you developed your personality in some sort of isolation
Yes. Okay.
because
Okay. Okay.
understand, right? So
Yeah.
this is about upbringing also, but also of course his later the influences on his personality. But let's have a look at those. So now here you have the accidental significations. um, I'm not quite sure what we can do with that. He's rational, he's uh, it's a humanitarian image, uh, and also famous person. Nobles signifies honest women. Well, that's not about Jung. Weak voiced, signs of learning and skill. That's interesting, but they might be typical of how we get to get acquainted with Jung. But
How
it's
important is this Leopold of Austria accidental significations in your practice of traditional astrology?
I don't do very much with it, but I wanted to present it here simply
Yeah.
because
Okay. Yeah.
there are very specific
Okay.
things that go for all the images, and these are the things that are related with the images simply because they move through the precession of the equinox, so they get each of the images has other fixed stars in it, which has to have to do with these things being the accidental significations because they don't go for all the images, so they are specific
So
for a certain
it's
image.
not really a part of your normal work in your craftsmanship in your workshop. This is something for other people to dive into, but it's not your cup of tea.
Um, well, it's becoming my cup of tea. Let's
Oh,
put
okay.
it that way,
Okay.
because simply because I did a presentation on it, and I'm really very interested in the idea what makes images different from each other.
Oh, okay.
And you have things that they have in common with each other, which are the elemental qualities and the tropical characteristics of images, etc., and the solid ones, etc. So
This
yes,
Leopold of Austria was an astrologer, right?
he was an astrologer. And well, this is quite an extensive list of everything having to do with the accidental significations, but
Uh,
it's interesting.
do you know anything about his life, his biography, Leopold of Austria?
I believe there can be something found on the internet, but I'm not
Oh,
sure.
okay. So
Yeah.
we have this literature about the astrologers, thick books about the lives of. I'll look it up for the next.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I believe that James Holden,
Yeah, I
when
was referring to
talked
James
about him.
Holden. Yeah,
Yeah, right.
in the
Yeah.
thick book of James Holden. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. So this is not very flattering, but these characteristics are modified by configurations and aspects, which I will delve into a bit further on. Uh,
Does that mean that you think Valence is right here about the general characterization of ascendant in Aquarius? Or
uh,
would you dare to say he might have
no, no,
been
no.
drunk when he wrote that?
No, 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 no. I don't think so. But it has a lot to do with Saturn itself, the ruler of this image, and well, it's not that flattering, but that has a lot to do with the way Saturn was perceived in ancient times, and there was also a difference, and Jung made it very clear because. Um, I did a talk for Acuta, the webinar number 2 on my video, channel, where I address the issue that Valens did, because not everything of a certain image is is part and parcel of a personality, and that has a lot to do with where the ruler of the image is placed. So I have two examples. These are the only one that Valens says, but we can uh, use them for the other images as well. So he says about Aries, when the rulers are well situated and testified to by benefics, the natives become kingly, powerful, and have the power of life and death. So there are certain characteristics of the image Aries, but the better ones of Aries come to the fore whenever the ruler is very well situated, very well placed, as is the case here with Saturn, the ruler of the first place, in its own image of the water power. So I'm thinking, yeah, I think
Basically,
it's
you were saying
an upgrade.
Valens was sort of leaving that part out when he described Aquarius, right? In Ascendant, he should have a second page. If Saturn is in Aquarius, we have to see it differently, but he didn't do that.
Yeah, but he said it only about two things, and that had to do also with the way he wrote. He didn't write everything out, but he suggested it in certain parts, and then you need to do it for the rest. Again, Valence says if the ruler should happen to be upon a pivot, which is an angular place, it should be with benefics, they will become bright, esteemed, tyrannical, and kingly.
Yeah.
So there are certain characteristics of the lion which only come to the fore whenever the ruler, the sun, is well placed and supported by benefics. So this is a
In the
very
community of the traditional astrologers, is there
Mhm.
literature where this is better done than in the case of Vettius Valens, a broader approach, modern or older books? Like, for example, did Abu Mashar follow Vettius Valens on that, or did he complement it with further information? If that is the case, that is the case. Or is modern literature like Demetra George or Chris Brennan or those people, do they correct this sort of not complete description of traditional astrology approach?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I've read a lot, but I'm not sure if they address this specifically, because no, I'm not sure. I
For
don't know.
my reason for my question is, if somebody comes from the psychology astrology and wants to change into traditional astrology, that would be his first question. How do you delineate
hmm
ascendant in Aquarius, and what would be the changing factors? And this is a changing factor. Saturn in the first house is a changing
Exactly.
factor to the
Yeah, yeah,
description of
yeah.
Vettius Valens. And if Vettius Valens is not supplying this, the newcomer coming from the modern astrology part says, "What rubbish is that?" He would say, right?
No, that's not
It's
what I
sort of
would say.
it's sort of rubbish. It's not the whole picture. And
Well,
if somebody takes Vettius face value and does not know what we were talking about, he is misdirected.
well, if we studied it intently, then you
Yeah.
would see these remarks. So, and the
Yeah, but
footnotes.
that means that you have to dive deep into Vettius Valens' textbook, which is as impossible as reading Rudolf Steiner, for example. You don't understand him that easily, and
Mhm.
that is one problem of traditional astrology. The translation book of traditional astrology hasn't been written yet, has it? To
I'm not
translate what is meant, to tell modern readers what is
well.
meant by these old books.
Well, the problem is that a lot of material that is produced on Hellenistic and ancient astrology uh, uses very different sources. And what
Yes,
I'm
yes,
doing is trying to get back to how Schmidt interpreted it and
yes,
how
yes.
he defined all these things, and which I will present in this talk as well.
So basically,
Um,
you would say, don't read original sources. That takes too much of your life. Read Robert Schmidt or listen to Robert Schmidt and Robert Soller,
yeah,
and you are well established to do a good approach of delineation of traditional astrology, and
right.
be very careful reading the original sources to translate even. When they are translated by Benjamin Dykes, there's a lot of translation work done since the last 40 years in the
Yeah.
Hellenistic astrology. But if you read
hmm
the primary sources, you
Yeah.
really get a problem.
You do, because Benjamin Dykes is an excellent translator of medieval material, but the problem is that medieval material is also already a deviation from a lot of things that were presented in the Hellenistic material, which I
How
will.
is your opinion of the two the Demeter books? Demeter Georges was writing a volume number 1 is 2018,
Mhm.
and the volume number 2 is coming up today these weeks.
Mhm.
What's your opinion of literature like that? Do you have an opinion on Demeter George?
Um, well, my opinion of Demetra George is that she's very thorough as a scientist, but what I would rather see, but hopefully they will come in the second part of her books, how she uses it, because she
Oh,
simply
okay,
presents it, well, this is how it's stated. And of course,
okay.
very interesting. She did a work on the daimon, which is very interesting, but I found very little in it to support the way I wanted to use the material to study Sadaika releasing from the daimon, for instance. So it's very good work and it's great work and it's very good to read, very nice to read. But always looking for practical applications, and I'm afraid I will be the one to have to do that myself. So,
So
and I will present it here.
basically you're saying the traditional astrology community hasn't done the task yet, fulfilled the task to write a manual for delineation with the information of the old books of traditional astrology.
Um, not quite sure because I know Chris Brennan wrote a book, and
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah,
not
but
acquainted
that's
with
more
it.
like that. Chris Brennan's book isn't the manual you're looking for as well. It's a very good book, but
Okay.
if you're looking for a manual, which normal people do, how do I use all the information since 300 before Christ till today
Hmm.
about traditional astrology methods? You will find out even Abu Mashar and all
Hmm.
the translations of Bonatti and then even the modern like William Lilly and people like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Okay, if you go into horary astrology, there is some manual sort of information.
Hmm.
But if you go into nativity delineation and world delineation and all that, electional astrology, my impression is the manual has to be written yet.
Well, my advice would be study Robert Schmidt and look at the videos that Volker and I
Yes,
have
yes,
produced up until now. Uh,
yes.
I, I would be very hesitant by saying that the way I do it is the ultimate way of doing it, because I need to uh, experience it from reading the manuals and listening to Schmidt and trying to understand what is going on. And that's what I'm trying to do with this video, especially simply because is so much material, new material, for instance, on the configuration and aspect doctrine, that you really need to go into that, and you cannot do it superficially. You need to try to work the new information and try to see where it gets you.
Okay.
And that uh, I'm not sure which astrologers do that with the Hellenistic material. And let me say beforehand, all these astrologers that you mentioned have done a really great job on the medieval astrology.
Yes.
But the medieval astrology is also something that was a systemization of astrology, which pretty soon deviated somewhat from whatever the Greek astrologers were writing about. And
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
course, we then have the translation issue, etc., etc. So please let me state that whatever is said about the Hellenistic astrology very often gets mixed up with later Arabic astrology, and that is sort of a
Yeah.
heady mix of how you can use it. And there's a lot going on which Schmidt debated, which he did not agree with, but yeah, who am I to say that he was right and the other ones are not? Okay, but
I think the solution might be lying there that there's a lot of courses on the internet. Chris Brennan is offering courses, Stephen Birchfield is
hmm,
offering courses,
yeah,
Lee Lehman is offering courses, and so on and so forth. I
as am
believe.
I.
Yes, as you are, and I believe the problem here is there is not enough for free. You know,
Hmm.
these courses cost a lot of money, or not so much
Right.
money
Yeah.
differing in prices, and the free content availability is not that good. What we are doing is free content for the internet, and so this is rather rare to offer an introduction into traditional astrology and the application, how to do it, and a sort of a manual approach. It's behind the paywall, and that's probably one of the problems.
Okay. That's well stated. Indeed.
All what I want might be behind those paywalls, which I didn't bridge because I didn't pay them. Okay. Okay.
Okay. So let's have a look at Jung's chart further. The solid image. What other topics does Saturn bring into the mix, which have an important role in his life? Well, of course, Saturn rules the 12th place as well, and the 9th place by exaltation. And these are matters of great interest to Jung, because we know that he had a lot to do with what we now call the 12th house and the 9th house combinations of divination, etc.
When you say ruling of the 9th house by exaltation, that is traditional, that the exaltation is sort of a ruling position?
That's a very good question, which I will address in the next.
I thought it is a guest position. This is the high praised guest of the host. If he is exalted, he has all what he wants to have, but it's not ruling. And he doesn't have to supply the food. That's what the host has to do.
That's true. That's true. Yeah.
But you still use this expression. If it's exalted in the 9th, he is ruling the 9th house. If he is exalted there.
Well, yes,
okay.
I would say so, simply because in other methods, for instance, in zodiacal releasing, you can see focus periods arriving whenever the exaltation planet of a certain image rules a sub-period or something. So
are you mainstream on that aspect, or is that specifically Martien Hermes to saying I think ruling the 9th house?
No, it has an influence, and it has something to say about the 9th house.
And would you say that Robert Zoller and Robert Schmidt wouldn't turn in their graves if they hear that he is ruling the 9th house by exaltation? They would go along with you.
Oh yeah, very much so. Yes.
So the authorities are with Martien Hermes here. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Very good.
And interesting as well, one of the significations of Saturn has to do with stone, with building and sculpting. Is something that Jung also did.
Oh, and, yes, he built a tower by himself.
Yeah.
Falling in tower, Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
I couldn't do that.
No, he did. Yeah, and he was a very interesting painter as well. He painted a very
He was not an interesting painter. He painted pictures you look at, how could he do that? The Red Book is full of paintings like that, and it's an unbelievable craftsmanship in painting in this Red Book.
And making the mandalas as well.
Yes, and that's why since the publication of the Red Book, everything changes. Looking at Jung, he was a painter by highest standard.
Great.
Yeah. That's one thing which hasn't been recepted yet in depth as well. We're still struggling to understand this guy. How on earth could he build a tower in Bollingen? How could he paint these pictures? How could he invent a total system of psychology? Well, you could say the reason is the Red Book, because everything after the Red Book came out of the Red Book. You could say that. Okay.
Yeah, okay. Now, the next step is that we need to understand what's happening with the ruler of the first place, which is, of course, Saturn. And then we have to look at the planetary configurations with Saturn. And these are my sources for it, the Definitions and Foundations, which is a very important book on what was meant with the several separate ideas about what aspects really were.
Which you still can't buy on Amazon from Germany, right?
No, not yet.
It's still behind the paywall of the Robert Schmidt estate, and that is just unbelievable stupid, in my opinion. People want to read this stuff, and if you're living in Europe and you want to get this from America, forget it. Taxes and problems and sending problems and high, unbelievable charges for postings. I hate it. Why don't these people understand that this book has to be published on a platform where it can be bought from India to Germany?
Yeah, right.
It's just unbelievable stupid.
Yeah, I know. Okay. Yeah, they were not that handy with all their.
That's the understatement of the day.
Thank you.
Okay.
Well, I also have, of course, a second intensive on the system of Hermes, which is about planetary configuration. Also, a very important thing to get acquainted with when you can, there's a new website where all his material will be
Yes,
published, and
but try to
hopefully,
get this book in print. Forget it.
yeah, I hope that it will be soon. So you have to refer to me. So I will be talking a bit about the configurations, and I sorted them out here. We have these configurations having to do with Saturn. Now the question again is, which ones of these are the most important ones? Which one dominates? Well, the ones dominating are the real aspects, and the real aspect, and that's the word used by Hellenistic astrologers. The word aspect was limited to configurations which were within a three-portion range, within what we would call a degree, right? So uh, we are taught we nowadays we talk about exact aspects, but the idea exact in Hellenistic terms was whenever it's within a range of three portions, then you can say that the aspect is really happening. And I will show what the difference is. So here we have two of them, which is Mars, which is applying via a hexagonal figure, which is a sextile, to Saturn, which is within three portions, and of course Jupiter, our friend in the ninth place, which is the most tight of these aspects. So that's important. So
When
what
you
is the
talk
difference?
about portions, you're not talking about degrees, right?
Yes, I'm talking about degrees, but the word degree is again, as Schmidt pointed out several times, is a very bad translation of what is actually Moira. The portions, the what we now call degrees in Hellenistic astrology were called Moira, which is a better translation is portions because Moira
Let's
has.
take my case. I'm a stupid learning pupil of traditional astrology, and I don't get what you're talking about. You are saying it's not a degree, but it looks like it has to do something with closeness to the degree position. Are you talking
Yeah.
about closeness to the degree
No,
position?
I'm simply saying that the 360s, what we call now degrees of the zodiac, were simply called Moira. So there were 360
60
Moira in the chart.
Moiras. Okay, yeah, okay,
Okay. And Schmidt translated them as portions because the word Moira has a lot to do with all the fate concepts and
okay.
has to do with the distribution. So that's a very important principle of why these 360, what we call degrees,
Yeah.
were called Moira, and he translated them as portions.
And so
So
basically you're saying if something is within three portions, which would be translated into
degrees, yeah.
360 degrees divided by 360, so that 1 degree, if they
Mhm.
are, if it's a sort of an orb, right? An orbis.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. And it
Basically,
has to do with two different conceptions about what configurations are and aspects are, because the configurations go by sign, by images,
yes.
which is also the discussion. Can there be aspects out of sign? But the difference is that this idea of approaching and separating, which has to do with these portions, is a different concept of relations between planets.
So
So you
basically, you
can,
are saying application has, if it's 3 degrees apart, there is no application. The application starts when it's three degrees before, and separation when it's 3 degrees after.
yes, and these can go over sign boundaries.
Oh, okay. So you have
And
you have.
that's the
Oh,
reason why
okay.
it's a separate concept. So
Oh,
there's a lot of debate about, oh, can a planet in the lion have an aspect with a planet in Pisces? Can it go over the sign boundary?
by
Well,
portion, yes. By sign, no.
exactly. Thank you.
Okay. Okay.
That's it. Okay,
Okay.
so what is this about? Well, Schmidt said the words used for the configurations always have to do with assuming a figure. So the planet A has a certain relation to the planet B, and the way is by assuming a figure. And I showed you some examples here in these pictures, that assuming a figure can be by means of simply taking a posture towards another planet or towards another person. So you can do it in a dance. A dance opens with certain moves. The martial artist always opens with certain movements, and then that's it. So that's assuming a figure, and the assuming of a figure implies something about planet A uh, having an opinion about planet B. So that can be very nice. Uh, so you whistle to somebody, oh, you're a nice person, or you can do another one, and a hostile one, or you can opening moves for a dance, or you can spit at someone. That's always assuming a figure. When planets are engaging in a figure, and that has to do with these Hellenistically called aspects, they are now engaging. So they are assuming a figure is from a distance, and engaging in a figure is actually going about it. So then the martial artist really gets into a fight with somebody. The opening dance moves now result in you grabbing a partner and start moving around the dance floor. That's the difference between these two. So that needs to be very important, because that's a very interesting and very important difference between what planets do in configurations, which is also not within the 3-degree area, and what they do when they are engaging in a figure. Then they are really doing something to the other planet.
When
And
they are engaging in a figure, are we talking now about the portion
yes,
application and separation?
this is everything between 3 portions. Whenever planets move into the distance within 3 portions,
In the old language, when they enter the orb, right?
right, and then they are really engaging. So, and the interesting terms related to this is bonification and maltreatment.
Okay.
And you can only maltreat something when you think about fighting. You can only maltreat somebody when you're actually fighting somebody.
And is the term aspect restricted to the portion
Yeah,
philosophy, or and
yes,
there is
in
no
Hellenistic astrology.
and
Yeah,
there is no aspect if it's only from sign to sign?
right.
How
And
do you
then
call that? Configuration?
testimony. Yeah, the general word for it is
Ah,
testimony.
okay.
Sorry, is configuration, and
Okay.
that's to differentiate it from the word aspect.
But in
Okay,
the delineation, when you delineate
I
the
will get. I will get
configuration,
to that. I will
but
get
but
to that.
basically to take this on this step as well, if you're talking about configuration, which is not an aspect, because an aspect is something in the bounds of the portions of the moiras, but
Hmm.
still the configuration is sort of available for delineation. And in the practice of the delineation in traditional astrology, you delineate as if you would be in modern astrology delineating an aspect, right?
No, I will show what the difference is.
Okay, okay. But that has to be solved. We have to find out how
Yeah.
is the
Yep.
difference in delineation in configuration, which is not inside the 3 portions.
Exactly.
How does the Hellenistic astrologer look at a trigon
Hmm.
configuration, trigonal or quadruple configuration in a chart? And
Hmm.
how does it differ from the methods of modern psychological astrology in delineating aspects where this differentiation doesn't exist?
Exactly.
Okay,
So,
we'll
uh,
wait and see. Okay, getting curious. Okay.
yeah. Okay. So here we see something going on with this. So this stuff answers the question, which thing were a major influence on his life and his personality. And these two planets are the most important ones, simply because they are really engaging with Jung
They are
via,
inside the 3 portions. They are
right,
real. They are real aspects.
right. So when we look at the 11th place, it's about friends, breaches with friends, because it's Mars, and organizations. And the ninth is, of course, philosophy, religion, academia, and science.
Okay.
And these are they are very strongly connected with Jung's life and his personality.
So basically, you are saying from Mars to Saturn, we find the break with Sigmund Freud.
For instance, that has a lot to do with what's very important, and has a very uh, it's a very formative experience in his life. That's what you can say.
Yeah.
So, looking at this, which comes from the introducing Jung, this domineering influence of religion via Jupiter in the ninth place was, of course, very, very strong. And you can see that also in the circumstances, because he was the only son of a Swiss Reformed Church
Who didn't believe in
evangelical.
God, right? You have to realize that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. In
Okay.
the end, right? And
No, not in
Jung's
the end.
family.
Already when Jung was young.
Okay. Now
That
Jung
is
was
that is the problem of this delineation aspect. If you take Jupiter Saturn, um, I have my problems to take his father figure as part of that aspect, because his father was not into religion, being a pastor. You know, one of the biggest problems for Jung was to understand how his father could do this and not believing in what he was preaching.
but we still need to understand that whenever Jupiter is in the ninth place, it has to do with people being operative in the church.
Yes, that's right. Yeah,
Because Jupiter, of course,
yeah,
has to
that's
do
right.
with
Yeah.
the archpriest, etc.,
Yes,
etc.,
yes.
and Venus is the exalted ruler of the ninth place, which has to do with rights, etc. And when you look at the ruler of the ninth place, it's in the sixth place, so there's something sick going on there.
Yes,
So
yes.
perhaps that might explain what you just said. But of course, he was simply surrounded by everything religious, his family, etc., etc. So, but there's more to say about this. But
Yeah,
please
okay.
understand that these are very, very deep influences which he could not
Yes,
escape, in a
yes.
sense, because these are all
Well, and
within
in
three
the end, he was
portions.
inventing a polytheistic archetypal cosmology, and that is
Mm.
Jupiter in ninth, right?
And also, please understand that the one receiving all this information is Saturn.
Yes,
And Saturn does specific things with these planets.
yes,
So that's perhaps a scientific approach, but it's also the sage, perhaps, as you mentioned
yes,
before.
yes.
Saturn responds to it, right? And Saturn always uh, is a planet of, let's say, difficulty. Being able to understand something and then trying to find your own way in it.
How
So,
about Jung's Saturn in this chart? The problem for people coming back to traditional astrology and learning traditional astrology, the malefic aspect of Saturn and Mars. And
mhm.
do I understand you right? In this chart, the Saturn is not as malefic as some people would think of Saturn, right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So when you talk about, for instance, Jung being a young man who was very sort of isolated when he was very
Yeah,
young for 9 years, that's typically something having to do with Saturn. But people who have Saturn in this place are always don't have a problem with being alone, so they
yeah,
don't
okay.
experience it as being isolated or being lonely. Something. Right.
How did you learn this problem in traditional astrology? This is a problem to understand the
Mhm.
character of a planet being malefic or benefic or not. The same thing applies to the benefic planets as well, because they can be malefic, right?
Right, yeah, they can by means of their condition and being
Yeah.
retrograde, etc., etc. Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
that's true. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Now, the second thing we need to understand about these concepts about relations between planets is the idea of testimony. So this is a definition from Antiochus. They exchange testimony with each other whenever they chance to be it, etc. The aspect configurations that we know by means of whole signs. So that's the idea of testimony. So the sun and the moon are applying to Saturn as well, but they are not within the range of this three portion difference, this orb, as you call it,
Yes.
Volker.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
let's have a look at this. There are two scenarios. When there's no talk about testimonies, when the planets have already been exact, so they are separating from each other. And the second one is when they are applying to each other, but one of them moves out of the image where it is in this chart. So when that is the case, So when they do apply to each other and they and they form this configuration within the images where they are in this chart, then we talk about the idea of testimony. So yeah, that's true for both the sun and the moon. Are they testifying? Yes, because the moon and the sun are moving towards Saturn. Saturn is not going out of the image where it is before these aspects are formed. So yes, they are both testifying to each other. So, and the interesting thing is that testimony goes both ways. Saturn testifies to the moon and to the sun as well. And that's something different from what Jupiter and Mars are doing with Saturn. That's another story. Okay. Just to introduce this principle further, these are the differences which with modern astrology, I think, and psychological astrology, there are three different ways of interaction going on between planets, which is zodiacally by disposition. This has to do with the interaction with the domicile ruler and perhaps the bound ruler, which I will address in the next talk about this chart. And then we have the topical places, which can also have a ruler.
When you
Which
talk about
about
bounds, you mean the terms?
Yes.
And you're talking about the Egyptian terms.
I'm talking about, yes.
You're using the Egyptian terms. Okay.
Right,
Okay.
I am, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And then the third one, you have the configuration and aspects. It's assuming figures or engaging in interaction. Engaging in the interaction is bonification or maltreatment, bonification by good planets, maltreatment by other ones, testimony, etc., etc. Flowing away, breaking off, fellow traveling, adherence. These are all the terms that I use here: application, flowing away, breaking off, fellow traveling, adherence, neighboring, etc. These are all newly discovered definitions of relations between planets having configurations or having aspects. So that's quite a difference with the idea, oh, that's a trine, so it's going to be good point. No, it's
when you look on your when you look back on your personal biography, when you started to transform from a psychological astrologer to becoming a traditional astrologer, we have this video when I was interviewing you about that. If you look back and your studies of Robert Solow and Robert Schmidt and probably something of Robert Hand as well, how much time would you attribute for a beginner, let's say for somebody who comes not from the psychological astrology, but starts from scratch and starts with traditional right from the beginning, how long does it take to educate somebody in your course, for example? How long does your course take?
Well, I leave it to people themselves because I do it online. So people send me their homework and I interact with them on that. So they follow it in their own tempo. So
what is it, an average, statistical average? If somebody is eager to learn this stuff and wants to invest every week some time of his life, how many years do you need to understand what you understand now?
Well, I totally engaged with Hellenistic astrology in 2008.
Okay.
That was really the turning point when I really switched from doing a sort of mix of medieval modern astrology to Hellenistic astrology. So that's what, 12, 13 years now. And I'm only just getting the whiff of how I can use this the way I'm presenting it now, because the quarters fall slowly sometimes.
So basically you are saying, be careful, people, to become a traditional astrologer, because learning doesn't end there. There is no manual which covers everything. If you would say how to open a practice for normal clients asking the normal typical questions, how many years of education would you attribute?
Oh, I would
3 years.
I cannot say. What I would advise people to do is first learn horary astrology.
Okay.
Then
How long for that? 1 year?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, okay. Okay.
The second one is learn the method of Marinus, which is actually sort of what Solar did.
Morat de
So the,
Villefranche, you are recommending
Mora-
Morat de Villefranche to study
yes,
traditional astrology. Jesus Christ, we are
yes,
on
yes.
different planets, we two of us.
We are, yeah. And the reason is
Okay.
because it's so straightforward.
Oh,
But
you're
don't
basically
take it
saying
as
Morinus is good for the synthesis problem, right?
well. It's a very good approach to a non-psychological take on a chart,
And
because
it's throwing out half of traditional astrology, by the way.
yes, and then you go into
Oh, okay.
the academy of astrology, and
Ah.
then I will confront you with all the things that we learned from Hellenistic astrology, which
So
is things that
basically you're saying learn orrery with all the old methods, then go
yeah.
to Morat de Villefranche, throw out half of it, what you
Hmm.
just learned, and then come
Hmm.
back and learn Abu Mashar and Vetus Valens again, and
No,
then you are full circle, right?
I I hate to say this, but I would skip the medieval stuff,
Okay.
and I would switch to the
Okay.
Hellenistic stuff immediately. But
Okay. So basically,
because,
you're not recommending the great introduction of Abu Mashar, and you're not recommending Abraham Ibn Essa. You're saying study Dorotheus and Vetus Valens and don't study Ptolemy.
no, I would say study Schmidt.
Ah,
Because
okay, okay.
yeah,
Schmidt and Solo, I suppose.
uh, yeah, or simply you can learn Marinus from his small booklet,
Oh,
and
okay,
James
okay.
Holden did very interesting translations of it, and
Yes,
there are German books on
he
the method of
translated the whole.
Marinus.
Holden translated the whole
Yeah,
Morale de
yeah, yeah,
France, more or less. Yeah. Okay.
yeah. Yeah, we have some Dutch
Ah, okay.
books. The reason is simply when somebody does come from a psychological point of view on astrology, then you will be um, put on your feet when you learn the method of Marinus, because he's very straightforward.
Yes,
He's
yes,
not,
yes. Okay.
of course, well, you know, and some listeners will know as well. So,
So
so
basically, the reason why you recommend this is that most people don't have the time to study all this stuff, and most people are not able to come to a level to decide for themselves what they like and what they
mhm,
dislike on the
yeah,
Morinus approach. So basically, you are saying follow your teacher, which is Robert Schmidt. If
hmm
you want to have your autonomy back, you have to study
hmm
so much of your life's time
yeah.
that it's probably not worth it. That's your position.
Yeah, it would take a lot of time. I have an
Yeah.
interesting example. I did a course on horary astrology, and there was a person there from Belgium who was not acquainted with astrology at all. So she
Yes.
didn't know anything about it, and she learned the horary astrology. And she was later in a group with people who we were doing natal astrology, and there were a lot of people there who came from a psychological background in astrology, and
Okay.
they were always amazed at this woman who was within 2 seconds almost
Straightforward. Straightforward.
right. She could really uh, point to, well, it's about this, and then when you get A plus B and C, then you
Yes.
must conclude D,
She
right?
had the traditional approach
Right, right,
without the foggy, misty stuff of the
right.
psychology. Okay.
Astrology to the point, in
Yeah.
a certain sense, right?
Oh,
So
okay.
that's interesting. So that would be my recommendation: study
Okay.
horary
Okay.
astrology first,
So
so you know the mechanics.
basically we come to the conclusion in traditional astrology, the dependence on a good teacher is much more important
Right.
than in
Yes.
psychology astrology.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, well,
Okay.
that's not a good message, because that means traditional astrology to be done properly. You better find yourself a king who pays your life, right?
Something like that.
Something like that. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but you
Okay.
can do my course because my course is divided in 3 topics.
Oh,
Prologos, the first one, is
yeah.
actually the way Marinus taught astrology,
Okay.
with some provisos. And then in the second one, you get to the Hellenistic stuff. And in the third one, we're going to
Yeah.
do Time Lord systems. So, well,
So
that's
basically, the community of traditional astrologers is a very diverse community, and I'm not talking about this gender idiocy, gender idiocy. I'm talking about the diversity between Stephen Birchfield and Chris Brennan and Demetra George and Lee Lehman and Martien Hermes. Sometimes they are planets apart. In the end, they come together, but the way to come together on the mountaintop is quite different.
Yeah. Many roads leads to
but
Rome, right?
there are many more roads here in traditional astrology to the top of the mountain than there is on. If you want to study psychology, astrology, well, it's very easy. Books of Liz Green and Howard Supporters and Dane Radja, and you're there, right?
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Very good.
And that's fascinating and interesting. Yeah. Okay. So let's have a look again at the testimony relation. So the moon and sun testify to or about or for Saturn, which is Jung himself as a person and his life. So as we say, there is a saying, such and such is testimony to the excellence or the activity or the special qualities of this person, of this life, etc. So please understand there's a difference between the conceptualization of the actual aspects belonging to Jupiter and Mars, which are engaging with Saturn, which is in this case to bonify him, which especially Jupiter is doing, and Mars is providing some difficulties. Please understand, Mars is, of course, in the image of the bowman, which is, again, the planet having to deal with everything that's coming from its ruler, which is Jupiter. I will address this more in depth in the second presentation, but you really said indeed that Jung had strong difficulties with the religion that he was meeting with in his parents and whoever, and that's typically for Mars having to deal with something that Jupiter is providing. And that has a lot to do with how the guest-host relation is conceived.
Well, we just remember the dream of the young Jung when God was shitting on the Basel Cathedral in a very large mountain of shit. It's quite an interesting dream to delineate.
Right. So that's very interesting because he was struggling with whatever Jupiter was presenting, but it was also fascinating. So, okay, let's not get into that too deeply, but it's an excellent example of what happens with the planet being the guest and the host providing material for the guest to deal with. And how does Mars deal with something? He shits on it, he tears it apart, he discusses about it, because that's what Mars does. He is angry about all that. Well, it's interesting. Okay, testimony. So they go both ways. Interesting. Well, let's have a look. So you can say that Jung's life and personality is testimony of or testifies to the principle of what he called individuation, which of course is a sun principle. I'm sorry, my dog is barking. Perhaps something is delivered. Sorry. Kom, niet doen. So, this individuation principle is, of course, very much a sun principle. So, self-development, etc., etc. The study of mandalas, the path to the center. So you can say that his life is testimony of the sun principle. You could also say that the sun testifies to Jung as a person, etc. So when you look at the moon, which is also a very interesting one, the moon testifies to the darker realm of the more occult and parapsychological experiences that he had, that also accompanied his life and work, and which he tried to integrate into his work as tools also. Mercury and Venus are, of course, in a trine to the midheaven, the MC point. But of course, he wanted to treat of them scientifically. So these are all moon principles. So his work is also testimony to the archaic sciences that went before the advent of psychology, seances, alchemy, etc., etc. So interestingly enough, these two planets as well, these two lights, shed light on what testifies to the life that this man had. And well, of course, his life is testimony of that.
If you would have lived, in 1875, I believe that's the birth date of 75, right? Jung. Let's
Yeah.
say you would have lived in 1876 and the father and the mother of the young baby would have come to your practice. Would you, with your knowledge of today, would you have been able to prognosticate something of that? What we see here in retrospect is quite easy. I mean, that's
Hmm.
that's that's not the difficult part.
Yeah,
The,
it
the
is.
difficult part for the traditional astrology was to prognosticate correctly, and that the king and the queen he was doing his job for would win the
Hmm.
next battle. How good would you have been in 1876 to prognosticate what you were writing on this left-hand side of this slide?
Well, I'm not sure if I could do that with these principles, simply
Okay,
because
okay.
um, the difference between testimony and maltreatment and bonifications were not known at that time, as far as I know.
Mhm.
Um, but of
Well, take
course,
take your knowledge of today. The question goes into the research of prognostication. The University of Erlangen-Nuremberg
hmm
has a special department of the science of prognostication in the old days and in modern times, and they have a
hmm
lecture every week. Yesterday there was a lecture on the on the trap of what can happen to prognosticators. Now,
hmm
if you look at traditional astrology, how you practice it, and you're
hmm
looking at the first house, which is the personality, how good is traditional astrology in delineating in prognosticative ways for the future of the child, how his personality will be? How good is traditional astrology on that?
I think it's very good at that,
Okay.
but it's also, I think, a bit more objective as compared to modern astrology. That's my take on it.
How do you argue on that part? What's your
Well,
argument? Why is traditional astrology able to do that? Because I think we are both on the same page saying what is written on the left page of this slide, you could
mhm.
not say in a client setting for the future, could you?
Um, mm, in my case, I would say this about the life of this person,
You would
simply
come to
that
the same textual framing like you do here in retrospect for Jung. You would say that is possible with the traditional astrologer.
this is what I do with clients.
Okay.
So I
How
try
how
to
how how
define.
is how is how is the statistic on how good is the community? Let's put it this way. Do you
I
get
have no idea. I have
you
no
don't
idea.
have feedback from later in 10 years after the client session? No feedback. Yeah, you were right.
Oh, I always get that when I do horary charts.
Okay, that's easy because that's for short term.
Okay, but it's also interesting to do because it's also about prognostication.
But
So,
basically, you're saying we take the orary practice where we get the feedback that we are right, we are good at what we are doing. The
yeah,
orary
yeah.
astrologers in traditional astrology are good what they are doing.
Mhm.
But we have a scientific problem to say how good are we on the personality delineation side. That has not been studied yet, right?
Yep, I
Okay,
think so. Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
okay. So basically, we are projecting. If we are good in doing orary, there's a good chance we might be good in what we are doing on the nativity delineation as well. But the studies have to be done before we really know.
Yes, I think so. And I'm reminded of a quote that Robert Zoller used time and time again. He said, "You can only predict what you know." So you can only say something about something in a chart when you do the work of delineating it and trying to understand what it's doing in the chart and not wishful thinking
Yeah,
about
okay.
how this planet might function.
Yes,
So
okay.
whenever a planet is in a certain period system is the ruler of the period, then you have to say that the period has a character of that planet. And to do so, you need to be able to delineate what the character will be whenever that planet is ruler of the times. So when,
Okay.
okay, so
Yeah, okay.
that's what you do, yeah.
Yeah.
And taking into account, for instance, Saturn is of course the planet that signifies Jung himself, and then you have to see it's retrograde. So when will it become direct again in this life, etc., etc. So
Yes.
yeah, all the things are in order, are in place. Okay, now we're going to a next step in our delineation of the configurations and the aspects. That's the superior position, which is the RDs. I talked about this in previous presentations as well. Just take this into account. Whenever a planet has a superior position, which means that it's you can count the images and then equate them with the houses. So you can see that Jupiter is in the 9th place relative to Saturn. Should there have been a planet in the Scorpion, then it would have been in the 10th place, and the 11th place also goes. So that's the one, the planets moving towards Saturn. That is what superior position means. And these planets are dominating and overpowering influences, which we have already established, but now it's again confirmed by these planets having a superior position. This is about the quality of these planets. These planets are not heliacally rising because the sun is moving towards them, so they are heliacally setting in a certain sense. But especially the sun is angular, so that's a strong one. But okay, I'll leave that for your own studies. Okay, configurations. Let's have a look again. We see here that the Saturn itself is in superior position to the moon. If you count the moon as a first place and you count to Saturn, you see that Saturn is in the 10th place, and the moon is actually applying to Saturn. So there's something going on. Well, the very interesting delineation and translation by Schmidt is that this is called decimation. And decimation is, of course, a not so kind word, but it has to do with reducing the influence of the other planet or trying to come to grips to it. That's my interpretation. So Jung wants to master, as it were, the moon. So he wants to dominate it or reduce its effects or simply study it scientifically, which is what he did. He engaged with all the paranormal activities, which are, of course, a moon thing, divination, dream interpretation, etc. It's all moon stuff. And he, of course, had a very scientific approach to that at first.
I have a
So,
question to this moon aspect.
okay.
In the community of the traditional astrologers worldwide, you can find the information how they do their work. Some of them say, I start with the ascendant, then I do the soul of the client. And I was wondering what they might mean by soul. Is soul defined in traditional astrology? Is the moon equivalent to soul and all his configurations and three portional aspects? Or is soul something to be differentiated from the moon in the chart? How is your approach to the soul? How do you delineate? If you would be one of those astrologers who say, I delineate the ascendant and then I delineate the soul of the client, how would you understand delineating soul in traditional astrology?
What I know from Valence is that he associates the sun with the soul, because the soul is the thing that moves us, which incites us to come into action, to move. So whenever you want to do something, that which moves you is the faculty that that was a very fascinating topic for the philosophers as well. It's the thing that moves you. And the things that move us are, of course, very significant for us. So they associate.
But it's not your practice in your everyday clientele delineation practice that you start with the ascendant and then you don't move on to soul. You do something different with your clients. The soul is not your second step, right?
No, I think that, of course, the embodiment of the soul is very important, which is the first place and the ruler of the first place.
Yes. So basically, we have the situation that Martien Hermes and Lee Lehman and Demetra George and Chris Brennan and all the other high famous traditional astrologers, they all have their own practice developed by their own personal study of traditional astrology. So basically, there is no standardized approach in psychology. When I was learning psychology, astrology, it was easy. You delineate ascendant, sun, and moon, and that's 80% of the client. You know, that's what they do in psychology, astrology, and the rest is the 20%. Whereas in your case, being an autonomous traditional astrologer in your own right today, you say, I do this not, I do something different. And you have to decide whether you want to learn my method or whether you want to learn the method of Chris Brennan or Demetra George. They are different. And
I
the
think
community,
so, yeah.
basically you are saying traditional astrology, the topic is we are convinced that Hellenistic astrology is our foundation. And then it starts to differentiate. Some people take the Arab sources. Some people take even the younger sources, like you do, Morinus. You are sort of a Twitter personality. You do the old stuff and you do the most modern stuff, Morinus, because with Morinus and William Lilly, the traditional astrology sort of ends. After them, there was no traditional astrology. So basically, this whole field of traditional astrology is very, very differentiated, and not so easy to understand why it is differentiated.
Well, it has a lot to do with opposition to the things that Schmidt introduced.
Okay.
There are a lot of people who are not favoring his interpretations.
Okay.
I do, because I cannot read Greek, so I have to depend on an authority on Greek, and Schmidt was an authority on ancient Greek. And well, you know, Volker, when you listen to Schmidt, you really learn stuff about what the possible implications are of using specific words for specific things in astrology. And he was very good at that. And these things have made such a difference for me, but simply because there was an understanding. Schmidt always said, I will not teach you in the sense that I will simply tell everything there is to it. I want you to experience it the way I did.
Okay.
And Schmidt experienced by translating this material and going through the cryptic texts and having to do the work to try to understand what it all meant. That gave him an experience. And
so basically for our viewers, to be totally transparent, what we like to do, this webinar series, or let's say these talks about C.G. Jung, my host, or my guest, you are my guest more or less. I'm it's reversed
You're
at
my
the moment.
host. Yeah,
at the moment, yeah. Basically, what the viewers should understand, when we two are talking about traditional astrology and C.G. Jung, we are talking out of the paradigma Robert Schmidt. Robert Schmidt is sort of a paradigm. The paradigm of Robert Schmidt is the basis of these talks. And if you want to get the whole picture, you might go to the other traditional astrologers, and they might delineate C.G. Jung quite differently to what we are doing here. So don't take this as the only approach in traditional astrology to Jung. This is the Robert Schmidt approach and the Robert Solow approach. Put forward to you, the viewers, by Martien Hermes, where you can do a course, where you can get your personal client delineation session. But don't misunderstand, this is not traditional astrology as such. This is Robert Schmidt traditional astrology.
Yeah, Robert Schmidt
Very
through
good.
The brain of Martien Hermes, and I'm not quite sure if I got everything that he said, but I'm trying to focus on the things that makes much sense to me, and hopefully we'll introduce you to a new way of going in deep into a certain chart, as I'm trying to do here, right? And these differentiations, considering configurations, are very telling in the importance of certain aspects, which ones are the most strong, which one have a specific signification. Testimony is quite something else from maltreatment or bonification. That's something completely different. And that differentiates what you can see in a chart. And that's very
Yeah.
important for being correct about what you can see in a chart. So,
Yes.
so yes, Volker, that's a very good way
And
of
basically, we are
putting
talking
it.
about the renaissance of traditional astrology since 1980 something, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah, yeah.
Robert Schmidt
Yep.
started around that time, and
No,
basically,
1994.
yeah, and
That's
basically,
a start.
we are only talking about less than 30 years
Hmm.
of Renaissance
Right.
back to the roots.
Hmm.
And basically, what still is missing in the community of the traditional astrology is the academic meta level where the different approaches in this Renaissance field of traditional astrology, uh, the book is still missing who compares what
Hmm.
is the difference between Robert Schmidt and Robert Soller and Robert Hahn and Demetri George and Chris Brennan and Luis Ribeiro and Helena Avila. And
Hmm.
there are differences, and the meta level hasn't been approached yet, right?
Yep. Yep. I think that's true. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. But this is important to know if
Hmm.
one watches this video, where we are, what is our faction, and there are other factions we are not talking
Yeah.
about.
Yep.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
Okay. Now I come to the final part of this presentation having to do with um, planetary configurations, because there are also some planets that Saturn does not see. So Saturn is in aversion to the image of the crab where we find Venus and Mercury. Um, and we could say that it's the anima and animus principle.
When you say aversion, you say this is a configuration where there is no classical, let's put it this way, in
Right,
parenthesis, aspect.
right.
It's
It's
not an
true.
aspect, we know it's a configuration, but if it's a configuration with this sort of degrees, it's in aversion, it's not testifying.
Right. These are images that cannot see each other, and whenever planets are in them, they cannot see each other. So, and it's very important to try to understand which planets are sort of invisible uh, in the makeup of this person, having to do with his personality and his life. So he's not quite well acquainted by himself with Venus and Mercury. So
Would you say Venus is sort of representative for woman in one's life?
yes, and the animus in a general sense, and Mercury is, I think it's the puer senex idea, but also perhaps the animus.
So
So
basically,
the,
we are expecting in the future videos from you a detailed delineation. How on earth is an aversion of Venus a possible factor in the woman in Jung's life? Because he got more than one.
I will talk about it now.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
because,
Go ahead.
so what this means is that Jung must rely on other sources for information about these two planets because he cannot see them by himself. That's the metaphor for this. And how can this be remedied? It can be remedied by planets providing uh, testimony to Saturn and able to see Mercury and Venus. So we need to see whether they are applying configurations with Saturn and also by means of planets able to see both Venus and Mercury. So planets able to see Venus and Mercury and the crab. So let's have
Do
a
you mean you take planets who are not in aversion and
Mhm.
who themselves are not in aversion to Venus to transport the Venus aspect via themselves to Saturn? Is that your argument?
Yes,
Oh,
that's it.
okay.
So
Okay.
let's look at the candidates. We have, for instance, we know that Saturn, the Sun can see Saturn and is applying to him, but as you can see, the Sun is also in aversion to the crab. So the Sun cannot inform Saturn about Venus and Mercury simply
Yes.
because he's not able to see them.
Yeah. Okay.
So he will apply to Saturn, but he has nothing to mention about these two planets because
Okay.
he doesn't see them either.
Okay.
So so then we look at Mars. Mars, same difference. He cannot see Venus and Mercury because he's in aversion, 150
Okay.
degree distance.
Yeah.
By image, it's by whole images, not by with an orb or something.
Not by the Moiras, but by image. Okay.
Right, that's it.
Okay.
And then we look at Jupiter again, and there we have a very important factor. Jupiter, the,
Yes.
the
Jupiter
these planets.
gets the woman aspect to Saturn. Okay.
Right, and
Okay.
everything having to do with the crab idea and the deep dark base of
I
human
dare you. Does
existence.
that mean because Jupiter is the transporting vessel for Venus, Jung had to have so many women? The fullness of Jupiter
Yeah,
puts up the number of the woman in Jung's life. Is that
yeah.
would you say that is a valid delineation approach?
Yes, it is,
It is.
because
You mean
they
I'm
are.
right on that?
Yeah, because
Unbelievable.
Venus is
Okay.
in the
Okay.
exaltation image of Jupiter, and Jupiter is in the image of Venus, and so they have a mutual reception between the
Okay.
ruler and the exaltation ruler. So yeah, there's
Basically, coming back to this, a new client, a male client tomorrow comes into your practice without a mask, and you delineate his horoscope, and you
yeah.
have this situation. Would you dare to say, I suppose you have more than one woman in your life to expect?
No, I would probably say that he is very interesting for the opposite sex.
Okay, you wouldn't go as far as if this situation
To
repeats
suggest
itself.
that yeah.
Okay.
So you can see with Jung, when he has the sun in Leo, then the importance of other people is very, very big. So, and
Okay.
it almost always goes through
So,
relationships.
so we are approaching what Thomas Ring, one of the most famous German astrologers,
Hmm.
was talking about, is how far can astrology catch the real life? And
Hmm.
Thomas Ring was talking about Aussagegrenzen,
Hmm.
delineation bounds in English.
Hmm.
Thomas Ring was talking very much about where are the limits of the astrologer and his practice. And you
Hmm.
would agree with Thomas Ring on that case. You wouldn't go as far. You would say, this is the limit. I wouldn't dare to say in a constellation like this and a new client that this would correlate itself in real life, that many women would be heavily like
Interesting.
second
Yeah.
or third wife or something like that, parallel, like in Jung's life. You wouldn't dare to do that.
I'm not sure. It would depend on the person sitting with me. Zoller always said, look at the number of planets in the seventh place, and you know how many women this guy had. Or
Well,
had.
in our Jung's case, that doesn't work. It's only one, and he had
Mhm.
Emma Jung, his
I
legal
know.
wife.
Yeah,
He
I know.
had Sabina Spielrein, his mistress. He had
Hmm.
Toni Wolff, his second
Yeah, yeah,
wife,
yeah. I
not
know. I know.
legally,
I know.
and he had Maria Molzer. It's talked about, and he had Marie-Louise von
Louisa.
Franz, who was not a
Mhm.
mistress, but was very important female
Yeah.
person in his life.
Hmm.
And he had Aniela Jaffe, but you wouldn't be able to see that picture in that. You would go along with Thomas Ring. There is a limit what an astrologer can do.
No, I would probably say that when I find this exchange between Jupiter and Venus being in the sixth place, I would probably suggest that there might be talk about a secret lover or something, because
Oh,
the
okay.
sixth place is out of
Okay.
view, right? He never divorced, did he?
No, he never divorced. No.
Right. That is also an
No,
indication of.
his wife Emma accepted Toni Wolff as
Yeah,
his
I know.
second
Yeah,
wife
yeah, yeah,
till
yeah.
it lasted. It lasted only from 1910 something to 1930, and when Jung changed to alchemy, he changed the female was important for
Hmm.
him. Toni Wolff was important for him up till 1928 for his developing of his psychology and for understanding his dreams and for
Hmm.
understanding the Red Book visions. But when he changed to Wilhelm Reich and the Goldene Blüte, I don't know English translation, and when he
Hmm.
changed in researching alchemy, Marie-Louise von Franz came into the picture and Toni Wolff faded out somewhat.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay.
Okay,
Interesting.
interesting how far you would go. So you are not on Thomas Ring's side for the boundaries of astrology as such.
Now,
Okay.
um, as far as whatever these new methods reveal about a chart, it goes way deeper than whatever I experienced as a psychological
Yeah.
astrologer.
So Thomas
So
Ring is more important for the psychology astrologers, and they disobey his rules as well.
yeah, they do.
Okay.
Okay, the next planet, again, there we have Jupiter. And this Jupiter also carries sort of a secret, which is the invisible Venus Mercury content. So that's also something that fascinates somebody, because through another planet, through study, through ninth house issues, you get a whiff of something that goes deeper than that, but you don't have a personal grasp of it. So that's also very interesting to understand about whenever a planet cannot be seen by another one, and if it's helped by another planet that does inform you about these planets, and then it goes through another medium, as so to speak.
And this
So,
secret is sort of really describing what happened since 1912 in the autumn,
mhm,
when he had the
mhm,
first vision of the First World War, and he didn't understand that it was a vision of the First World War, up
mhm,
till his diving deep into his archetypal world, and that remained a secret basically till 2009.
okay.
And very few people knew that all what Jung was doing after 1913 was extemporating his red book and black book contents.
Mhm.
And we only know this since 12, 13 years now.
Okay. Interesting.
You are not so deep into the red book thing, right?
No,
I
no.
couldn't ask your opinion on the red book parts. That's something for the future for you.
Yeah, yeah, it
Okay,
is. Yeah.
okay.
Okay, the next one is the moon. The moon is, of course, the dispositor of these two planets, and it's moving, it sees them, and it's also moving towards Saturn. So, yeah, the question is, does the moon apply to Saturn? Yes, it does. Then we use this method. We look where the moon is, and you can see that the moon is even transposing Mercury to Venus. But after that, the moon moves with not to Mars, not to Jupiter, but the square with Saturn. So there we have it. This is also a table that shows this. This is from Solar Fire. The other ones are from uh, Planet Dance. So yeah, so Jung gets to know about these two planets, which are secrets to him simply because he cannot see them, through the testimony of the moon. And he also struggles with it a bit. Now, this biography says there were other religious influences on Jung stemming from his mother. Mother, that's a moon symbol, right? Maternal grandfather Samuel Pricework was a respected pastor in Basel who had contact with a different world altogether, the spirit world. So here is this fascinating subject of the spirit world, the alternative sector, the occult, as it was mentioned at that time, the name for it. And his mother said, while your grandpa wrote his sermons, I had to stand behind him to keep the bad spirits away. And Jung experienced his mother as a dark and unpredictable, rooted in deep, invisible ground. Well, this sort of says what I'm suggesting here about what the function is of aversions and how this works and how it gets acquainted with it. And he got acquainted with it through his youth experiences. The moon is in the fourth place. Through his mother, the moon, and he had to deal with a heavy mix of Swiss Protestantism and pagan spirituality.
And we have
So
to remember that his dissertation at university
mhm,
dealt
was
with his family member
yeah,
and
niece.
the seance practice of this part of his family tree.
Was it
And
Helene Prijswerk?
yeah, I think so. And
Yeah, yeah,
the dissertation tried to hide that family aspect, and
right.
people didn't know about this for quite a while.
Hmm.
It's something up to date now that we know that his dissertation was talking about Helena Price work, and
Yeah.
the seance works, and he participated in seances,
Hmm. Yeah, yeah.
and this aspect you are talking about here is very important to understand the archetypal work of Jung later on.
Right. So the interesting thing is he's a day chart, but he's very much involved with everything that's actually in the dark, right? And he is really engaging with it. And of course, all the influences that have to do with this, all these things in his life, the dominant influence of Jupiter coming from the 9th place, and he being aware of the more darker side of, or the other side of this religion, etc. That's very interestingly put into words by all these simple, well, I call them simple, but by all these takes on what's happening with the ruler of the first place.
And we have to remember that his traveling to Africa and his traveling to the natives in the United States, he was experiencing quite nearly going into dangerous situations in Africa on these journeys, and with the shamanistic experience in the United States and in other countries, the shamanistic, let's put it on the title, shamanistic experience, was quite important up till he changed into the research of alchemy.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's a good point, because I didn't mention that, but yeah, the 9th place, travelers abroad, right? But always,
and in this case, shamanistic traveling.
Yeah. Right. Okay. So, and then we come, because we're not done, we just evaluated all the things happening to Saturn, but now we have to get into the essential dignities. And that leads to quite a different chart with new rings around it, which show in which bound each planet is, and in which decanate each
and
planet is.
That's what you're doing next time, right?
Right.
Okay, I'm good. I'm good.
You were right on cue. You were on cue.
Okay, so now you have to give me back my host function.
This is about recording. Sorry.
And you should have to get out of your screen.
Oh yeah, right. I just need to stop share. Right.
Yeah. Now we are there. Okay. Now you have to give me back my host function. And you realize we did talk longer than you intended to.
Yeah, exactly 2 hours almost.
Yeah. And it was planned for 45 minutes, right?
Right. Yeah, something like that.
Well, you realize that this is different from the last series. In the last series, you were presenting your PowerPoint presentation, and when we talked about whether we want to do this Jung talks, this is what we will do in the future. You will get a lot of questions from the dumb, stupid pupil like I represent, because I want to use these talks to give the viewers an impression how easy and how difficult it might be to become a nutritional astrologer.
Yeah.
And I think we did a good job on that today. So where is my host function?
It's back, I believe. You're the host, yeah.
I'm the host. Okay, I'll try if you're right. Okay, I go back to the Okay, going back to the homepage where this video will be presented, for this video and for all the future videos on this series, I have the right to publish this talk with Martien Hermes uncut and unedited. And Martien Hermes has, for all the videos, another right he can do with the footage, whatever he likes. He didn't use that right up till now. He didn't put new videos with music and pictures and all that. He did the same thing I do. So at the moment, our videos are more or less alike, but he has the right to change this and take part of this video and put music under it and films and pictures, whatever. Coming back to the literature, if you want to follow what we are doing here, you might need to read Barbara Hanna, because she is, as it goes to the facts of the life of Jung, better than the dreams, the other book Jung wrote himself. And if you want to know about his relationship with Tony Wolff, you need to read None Savage Haley. And if you want to understand the approach of Jung and to psychology, you need to read Professor Dr. Soni Shamdasani, Jung and the Making of Modern Psychology. And Shamdasani is the editor of the Red Book. You have to know that. Okay. So far, so good. And that was that. And let me see whether I can get rid of this. Yes. So basically, I will stop the recording and we will talk later on a couple of minutes. So thanks for stopping by, and
Thank you.
hopefully for the video number 2 in a couple of days or weeks. I stopped the recording.